They laughed at a black mechanic the moment he stepped out of his truck. An hour later, he held the fate of an entire billion-dollar company in his hands. What happened next shook the industry to its core. Laughter rippled through the VIP lounge like waves against reinforced glass. A battered old pickup truck, faded and scarred, rolled slowly onto the runway in front of a gleaming Golf Hawk G800 under the soft morning sun. Inside, well-dressed men crossed their legs on leather armchairs, espresso in hand, smiling with smug amusement. "I thought we called a specialist, not some tow truck mechanic from a scrapyard," an older executive sneered, sparking a chorus of chuckles. The black man stepped out of the truck. His navy coveralls were stained, his boots caked with oil, and the toolbox he carried looked like it had survived a war. His name was Jeremiah Knox, 39, aerospace engineer, former award winner in mechanical innovation. But no one here knew that. They only saw his skin, his truck, and thought they understood everything. But today, they weren't just wrong. They were about to witness something that would turn their whole world upside down. Because Jeremiah wasn't just here to fix a plane. He was here to repair a lie, one that had made them rich and made him invisible. The $70 million aircraft stood still, silent and majestic like a sculpture. But Jeremiah didn't look at it with admiration. He studied it like a doctor inspecting the heartbeat of a patient on the brink. He crouched down and opened the main access panel under the plane's belly, and in less than a minute his pulse quickened. The pressurization system was failing catastrophically. The internal team had misdiagnosed it as a minor electrical issue, but if this plane took off, the cabin would decompress at 45,000 feet. Everyone aboard would die silently without warning, without time to react. Jeremiah didn't shout, didn't panic. He'd seen too many deadly mistakes to be rattled. His hands moved swiftly, precisely like a pianist, playing a piece that only he knew how to finish. Behind the tinted glass, eyes continued to stare. They didn't understand what he was doing. But one person, just one, watched differently. She didn't look at the grime on his hands. She was watching how he read the aircraft like a language only he could speak. And in that moment, the game began to change. The automatic doors slid open. Sharp heels struck the concrete rhythmically as a woman strode forward. Her gray tailored suit hugged a frame carved by power, her black hair neatly pinned back, her gaze like ice, sharpened by fire. Celeste Varela, the CEO of Varela Systems, owner of the G800 jet. She didn't glance at the murmuring men behind the glass. She didn't acknowledge the glare of Preston McKay, head of engineering. She walked straight toward Jeremiah. "How long will you need?" she asked. No greeting, no softness. "That depends on the problem, ma'am," Jeremiah replied without blinking. She checked her platinum wristwatch. "You have 1 hour. Impress me." Then she turned and walked away. Jeremiah didn't flinch. He'd stopped expecting respect long ago. He only cared about results. But in her eyes, brief as the moment was, he saw something unexpected. Not doubt, not pity, recognition. The kind he hadn't felt in over 15 years. Each bolt Jeremiah tightened, each circuit he double-checked, carried the weight of lives. His body moved with the precision of experience, not for attention, not for praise, but because he knew what failure would cost. Sweat slid down his brow and soaked into the already worn fabric of his uniform. The morning sun was high now, casting long shadows over the tarmac, but no one stepped outside. The same suits that had mocked him earlier now watched from behind their safe, filtered glass. They still wouldn't come out. They wouldn't ask questions. Because when a man like Jeremiah succeeded, it was just expected. But when he failed, that was the moment they were always ready for. And yet he didn't care. He never had. He clicked the panel shut with a finality that echoed louder than any applause. Wiping his hands on the same rag he'd used for years, he began to pack up. Job done. No thank you expected. But then he heard it, the sound of heels again. He looked up. Celeste Varela was walking toward him, alone. Celeste stopped just feet from Jeremiah, her face no longer stern, but contemplative. "How long would it have taken my team to catch that?" she asked quietly as the wind stirred her hair. Without hesitation, Jeremiah answered, "They wouldn't have. If this jet had flown, it would have gone down. No survivors." The silence that followed was heavier than any applause. Inside the glass-walled lounge, the crowd of executives stood, frozen eyes locked on the two of them. Celeste stared at him long and hard. Then she spoke just 2 words. "Come with me." Jeremiah blinked. "Excuse me?" Now, and with that, she turned and walked toward the restricted access corridor of the executive wing. Jeremiah picked up his toolbox heavy, not just with tools, but with years of rejection, and followed. Behind him, the murmurs began again. Not laughter this time. Something colder, tighter. Because what looked like a simple repair job had just opened a door no one ever expected to see open. And one man once mocked and ignored was about to walk into the very heart of power on his own terms. The glass door shut behind them with a soft click, sealing Jeremiah off from the stares, whispers, and laughter that had haunted him his whole life. Inside the executive wing, everything felt quieter, colder, as if power had its own temperature. Plush carpets muffled footsteps. Abstract art lined the walls, and recessed lighting cast a warm, deliberate glow. Nothing here was accidental. Every inch designed to say, "You don't belong here unless we say so." They stopped in front of a walnut-paneled door. Inside was a private office so pristine it could have been a movie set. A polished desk overlooked the runway. On the back wall, a single-framed quote read, "Dreams must be protected." Celeste sat behind the desk and motioned for Jeremiah to take a seat across from her. He sat slowly, toolbox still in hand like armor. "You're Jeremiah Knox," she said, not a question, but a certainty. "Yes." She turned her tablet toward him. On the screen, MJ and Knox, author of G7 Prototype. Jeremiah didn't flinch. But deep inside, the wound he'd carried for years stirred because someone finally had said his name and meant it. The screen glowed in front of them, throwing light across Celeste's sharp features. Her eyes lingered on one name. "MJ Knox," she said softly. "The signature on the original G7 design. The system that saved us millions and put us on the global map." She turned the screen again. "3 years ago, Preston McKay submitted it under his name. But I traced the original submission file. It came from your account. Time-stamped, digitally signed." Jeremiah's jaw tightened. "I submitted it on a Tuesday. I was escorted out on Friday." Celeste leaned back as if needing physical space from what she was absorbing. "Why didn't you fight it?" Jeremiah's voice was low, steady, but every word dripped with the weight of survival. "Because I was a black engineer from Southridge. Because when someone like me speaks up, we're labeled bitter, angry, ungrateful." He paused. "And because mechanics pay rent. Pride doesn't." She closed her eyes for a beat, not from shame, but from recognition. This wasn't just a man with a stolen patent. This was a man who had learned how to survive in silence because the world gave him no other choice. Until now, the knock came sharp, too confident, too familiar. Before Celeste could answer, the door swung open. Preston McKay stepped inside wearing a suit too smooth and a smile too rehearsed. But the moment he saw Jeremiah, his mask faltered. "Why is he still here?" he asked, voice tight. Celeste didn't look up. "We're discussing the G7 system." Preston chuckled nervously. "The G7 was developed by my team. Jeremiah was just a junior tech." Jeremiah stood slowly, eyes calm. "And yet 3 days after I submitted it, you recommended my termination for disruptive behavior and poor cultural fit." Celeste tapped her tablet. A corporate email opened Preston's name in the sender line. "Recommendation for termination. Timestamped precisely 3 days post-submission." The room went ice cold. "I don't recall that," Preston muttered. "You don't have to," came a new voice. The door opened again. A woman in her 50s stepped in, briefcase in hand, glasses glinting under the light. "Dr. Adrienne Clark," she said, "General Counsel." She laid a thick folder on the desk. "And I'm here to confirm Mr. Knox is the rightful inventor of G7, not you." Preston swallowed hard, because now truth had witnesses. Dr. Clark opened the folder, revealing blueprints, system logs, internal memos, and one USB drive. She inserted it into Celeste's computer. Dozens of files lit up the screen, timestamps, submission histories, schematics, and recordings. Celeste clicked play. Preston's voice crackled through the speakers. "Wipe his name off the design. No one's going to believe some black guy from Southridge built this. Just rebrand it. The board trusts me. They won't ask questions." Silence, the kind that suffocates. Celeste's hands tightened on the armrests. Adrienne nodded solemnly. "All of it's verifiable. Dated, digitally signed." Preston's face went pale. This is being twisted out of context. No, Jeremiah interrupted, voice like steel wrapped in pain. This is the context. He reached into his bag, pulled out an old notebook, dog-eared, smudged, but sacred. I kept everything. Notes, conversations, screenshots. Because where I'm from, truth dies without evidence. Celeste met his gaze. And in that moment, she saw the real genius, not just in his mind, but in his patience, in his resilience. Jeremiah hadn't just endured. He had documented everything. And he had waited longer than anyone should have to for this day. After Preston was escorted out, no smirk, no power, just silence. Celeste turned back to Jeremiah. Listen, she said quietly, you could walk away today with justice. Your name cleared, your royalties repaid, and no one would blame you. She paused. But I want to offer you something more. She tapped the tablet, pulling up a contract draft. Chief Innovation Officer, Varela Systems. Jeremiah didn't move, couldn't breathe. And she continued, I know about the garage company you have been running these past few years. I want to acquire it, not to absorb it, but to partner with it. You lead it. Full autonomy. 50-50 stake. Jeremiah stared at her, the silence pulsing with disbelief. For years, he wasn't even allowed in the room. Now someone was offering him the keys to it. Why me? He finally whispered. Celeste looked him in the eye. Her voice cracked just slightly. Because you didn't burn the house down. You waited, you documented, and you came back to rebuild it. You're not just brilliant, Jeremiah. She smiled. You're what this company should have been all along. Jeremiah stared at the offer in front of him, frozen, not from fear, but from disbelief. Emotion surged in waves, doubt, hope, the ache of years surviving in silence. He looked at the contract on the screen, but didn't reach for it. Why me? He asked, barely above a whisper. Celeste didn't hesitate. Because I've read every line of code you wrote, every sketch you left behind. I've spoken to young engineers you mentored in the shadows. And her voice softened because you overlooked, dismissed, told I was too different to lead. Jeremiah lowered his gaze, not in shame, but in something far deeper, recognition. I'm not offering this out of pity, she continued. This isn't penance. This is a beginning, a clean one, and I don't want to do this without you. Outside the window, planes roared down the runway. But inside this room, another kind of takeoff was preparing. And for the first time in years, Jeremiah felt the impossible shift inside him, not the need to fight, but the right to finally build, on his own terms. Jeremiah finally reached into his pocket, pulling out a flash drive worn from age and memory. He placed it gently on the desk. There's something else you should see. Celeste and Adrian exchanged a glance. They plugged it in. Folders unfolded, dozens of them. Designs, audio clips, internal emails, camera footage, detailed logs, receipts of everything. And at the center, a 3-minute voice memo. Jeremiah clicked play. You think he'll notice? We'll scrub his name from the system before sunrise. They'll think it was always yours. Hell, even if he finds out, who's going to believe a guy like that? Celeste flinched. It wasn't just technical theft. It was systemic. Where did you get this? Adrian asked, stunned. Jeremiah smiled, but it was a quiet, tired kind of smile. My father taught me, you don't win fights with fists, you win them with facts. I recorded that the night I was fired. Celeste looked at him with new eyes. Not just as a wronged man, but as a silent warrior who had gathered truth like arrows and waited for the right moment to release them. And now the arrow had struck. Not for revenge, but for reclamation. 2 weeks later, every seat in the Varela Systems auditorium was filled. Executives, board members, investors, press. The room buzzed not with excitement, but unease. The whispers had spread. Something seismic was about to happen. Jeremiah stood backstage, not in a suit, but in a clean work shirt with J. Knox stitched over the pocket. The same name once erased from designs, now about to be spoken from the main stage. Celeste took the podium first. Today we're not reviewing earnings, she began. We're reviewing our conscience. Gasps and murmurs. She stepped aside. Jeremiah walked forward slowly. He didn't read a speech. He didn't need to. He tapped the remote. The screen behind him lit up G7 pressurization system. Original author M.J. Knox. Then came the audio. Preston's voice, cruel, cold, undeniable. No one's going to believe he did this. Just take his name off. He's replaceable. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Celeste's voice cut through. This is not who we are anymore. People shifted in their seats. Some looked away, some wiped their eyes. Because what they had just heard wasn't a scandal. It was the reckoning they never saw coming. The fallout was swift. Preston was stripped of all titles and escorted out of the company permanently. Multiple senior managers were placed under review. Media outlets exploded with headlines. The stock price dipped, then soared. Because something extraordinary happened. Instead of collapse, trust was reborn. Celeste held another press conference, this time with Jeremiah at her side. Cameras flashed. The world listened. "We're not here to repair optics," she declared. "We're here to restore truth." She turned to Jeremiah. "And the truth is, this man didn't just invent a system. He kept his entirety while the rest of us lost ours." Jeremiah stepped up, his voice calm, his gaze clear. "I'm not here to be a symbol," he said. "I'm here to open doors that should have never been closed." In the weeks that followed, applications to Varela's internship program tripled. Donations poured into the new innovation wing. And for the first time, minority engineers from overlooked schools saw possibility instead of walls. The empire had once built itself on silence. Now it was being rebuilt on something far louder: justice. 1 month later, Jeremiah returned to a room he never thought he'd see again: his old department. It was once the place where his design had been stolen, where his name was erased, where he had been treated like a ghost in overalls. Now it bore a new name on the glass door: Jeremiah Knox, Director of Innovation. He stood outside staring at it for a long time, not with pride, not even with satisfaction, but with something deeper, a sense of earned belonging. He stepped inside. The desk was different, the lighting warmer, the energy cleaner. But on the shelf near the window, untouched and waiting, sat one item: his old toolbox. Dusty, dent-scarred, faithful. Next to it, a handwritten note from Celeste. "This door once closed on the wrong man. Thank you for choosing to open it again for others." Jeremiah held the note to his chest, eyes burning with unshed tears. This office wasn't his finish line. It was his new starting point. One he had built with truth, survived with silence, and now opened with purpose. 6 months later, in the heart of Southridge, the neighborhood Jeremiah once called home, where the streets whispered of struggle and dreams were often traded for survival, something extraordinary opened its doors. The Knox Center for Innovation and Opportunity. No marble floors, no corporate signage, just chipped paint, mismatched chairs, and a glowing sense of hope. Inside, kids who had been labeled as problems now tinkered with drones made from scrap rebuilt motherboards and scribbled wild ideas on whiteboards stained with imagination. They weren't told to sit still, they were told to dream louder. Celeste visited the center quietly on opening day, watching from the back as Jeremiah crouched beside a young girl assembling a robotic arm. She whispered, "You could have built an empire for yourself." He looked up, smiled. "I did," he said. "But this one isn't built for profit. It's built so no kid ever feels like I did, unseen." That day, no press showed up. No red carpets were rolled out. But in that small, sunlit room, something historic happened. Because a man who was once erased had created a space where every forgotten child could write their own name in the world. Jeremiah wasn't just a director now. He had become a mentor, a guardian, a mirror for kids who had never been told they were brilliant. Every Saturday, he showed up in a simple tee and jeans toolbox, still in hand. Not to fix jets, but to unleash minds. In a corner of the center, he worked alongside a group of teens reverse engineering an old drone. One of them, a 13-year-old girl named Layla, hesitantly presented her solar-powered prototype for wildfire surveillance. "I know it's stupid," she mumbled. Jeremiah leaned in gently. "Do you know how many people laughed when I said I wanted to build aircraft systems? How many doors were slammed just because of where I came from?" She looked at him, eyes wide. "And do you know what kept me going?" Layla shook her head. He smiled. "Because someone somewhere will always need your idea to survive. Maybe not today, but one day." Her hands stopped shaking. That day, Layla didn't just build a prototype. She built the belief that her voice mattered. And Jeremiah, he realized that revolution didn't always roar. Sometimes it started as a whisper in a child's heart. 1 year later, Varela Systems unveiled the G10 engine, designed in part by the very students Jeremiah mentored. The unveiling event drew hundreds of engineers, investors, skeptics, and supporters. Media outlets covered every second. Jeremiah arrived late. No security entourage, no suit, just a clean version of the same shirt he'd worn on the tarmac that morning, Knox stitched proudly over the pocket. He was invited to speak. He walked to the stage, slowly scanned the audience faces that had once laughed, doubted, ignored. And then he began. I used to think justice was proving people wrong. But I've learned real justice is when kids who look like me don't have to prove anything just to be heard. He pointed to a row of teens in the front, young engineers from his center. They didn't build G10 because they were told to. They built it because someone finally made space for their minds. The room stood, not for the engine, not even for the man, but for the truth they could no longer deny. That brilliance had never needed permission. Only a chance. 3 months after the launch, a black car pulled up outside the Knox Center. Jeremiah looked out the window and froze. It was Preston McKay, his once pristine suit now wrinkled, his eyes once cold now uncertain. He stepped inside holding the hand of a nervous 10-year-old boy. Jeremiah approached guarded but calm. I'm not here for me, Preston said quietly. This is my nephew. He was expelled from his gifted program. Too curious, too impatient, too different. He paused. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. Just a chance for him. Jeremiah looked down at the boy. He saw the same flicker in his eyes, the hunger to be seen. Then he looked back at Preston. He's welcome here. But you'll stay outside. This space is for builders, not gatekeepers. Preston nodded, eyes glassy. And as he sat alone on the front steps, listening to laughter and invention echo from inside, he realized some doors once closed in cruelty are reopened only by grace. Jeremiah sat alone one evening in the back room of the center. The sun was setting outside, casting gold across blueprints and half-built gadgets. On the shelf above his desk sat his old toolbox, dented, stained, faithful. Next to it, a photo of his mother cleaning office floors. Below it, a plaque that read, "The door they shut on him, he reopened for everyone else." A student peeked in. "Mr. Knox, can I ask you something?" "Of course. How do you know if you're smart enough to change the world?" Jeremiah smiled, walked over. Kneeling to eye level, he answered, "You don't need to be the smartest. You just need to believe even when no one else does." That night, he watched from the window as students filed out laughing, arms full of parts and plans and possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to breathe. Not in relief, but in peace, because he had taken everything meant to silence him and built something that could never be shut down. Not a company, not a comeback, but a legacy. Exactly 1 year to the day since the center opened, a celebration was held not in a ballroom, but right in the middle of Southridge Park. No velvet ropes, no red carpet, just folding chairs, paper banners, and the hum of a community finally breathing easier. Jeremiah stood at the makeshift podium, but today he didn't speak about innovation or justice. Today he spoke about Mary Knox's mother, the woman who worked night shifts cleaning office buildings so her son could stay in school, the woman who mended his only school bag with fishing line when they couldn't afford a new one, the woman who stood silently at doors she wasn't allowed to walk through so one day her son could open them for others. "I wouldn't be here without her," he said, voice shaking. "Not because she had power, but because she gave me mine." Then for the first time, Mary was called to the stage. She trembled. Her hands shook as she took Jeremiah's arm. And when he bowed before her, the entire park rose to their feet. No speeches, no fanfare, just tears. Because finally the world saw the woman who carried a legacy in silence. Every week more kids came to the Knox Center. Some walked miles, some came hungry, some came carrying nothing but bruised notebooks and questions no one else had bothered to answer. But Jeremiah welcomed them all. One afternoon he found Malik, an 11-year-old who never spoke much, sitting quietly surrounded by wires and bolts. On the table was a small, shaky design for a fire response drone. Jeremiah sat beside him. "What's this?" Malik shrugged. "Just an idea, probably dumb." Jeremiah smiled softly. "You know what they said about me when I drew my first aircraft system?" The boy looked up. "They called it unrealistic, unnecessary, too much for someone like me." He pointed at the paper. "But this isn't dumb. This is vision." For the first time, Malik smiled. That afternoon, no code was written. No machines were powered. But something even more powerful sparked. Belief. In that tiny oil-streaked room, a quiet revolution was taking root not in blueprints, but in the hearts of children who had never heard the words, "I believe in you." Jeremiah's story didn't stay small. It spilled out into headlines, into boardrooms, into schools and investor briefings. Soon other companies were forced to look inward. Audits were launched. Diversity reports no longer got buried in inboxes. One CEO even called Jeremiah personally asking how to build something real. His reply was simple. Start by listening to the voices you used to ignore. One day he stood on stage at a national tech summit beside three engineers, each from a background the industry had long overlooked. He didn't deliver a grand keynote. He just said, "You don't need to fit the mold. You need to break it so others can finally breathe." The audience didn't cheer wildly. They stood slowly, thoughtfully, because they knew they weren't just witnessing a man reclaiming space. They were witnessing an entire system learning how to change. A year after Jeremiah's appointment, the National Academy of Innovation invited him to deliver the opening speech. The audience was packed with executives, politicians, scholars, all waiting. He stepped onto the stage. No slides, no tech, just his voice. "When I was younger, I thought success meant proving them wrong," he said. "But now I know real justice is when the next generation doesn't have to prove anything just to be seen." He paused, scanning the room. Revenge is easy, but redemption, that's where the work is. He didn't call out names. He didn't need to, because everyone already knew the system. He was speaking of the system many of them had helped build. And yet, by standing there, Jeremiah wasn't just accusing, he was offering a bridge. A chance to start again, not by erasing the past, but by choosing to do better. The room didn't erupt, it exhaled. And from that breath, 1,000 new possibilities began to rise. 10 years after the day they laughed at his truck, Jeremiah sat in a quiet room at the center. The walls were filled with student designs, some rough, some brilliant, all brave. His old toolbox sat on the shelf, still dented, still dusty, still his. A young girl peeked in nervous. "Mr. Knox, can I ask something?" "Always. How do you know if you're smart enough to change the world?" He crouched beside her, eyes soft. "You don't," he said. "You just start building anyway. And when someone tells you to stop," he smiled, "build louder." That evening, as kids filed out into the dusk, arms full of parts, dreams, and purpose, Jeremiah stayed behind. Not to work, but to sit in silence. Because this wasn't about awards or patents or proving anyone wrong. This was about a room that once shut him out, now filled with voices that would never be silenced. He hadn't just survived the system, he'd rewritten it, not with vengeance, but with vision. And that was the truest legacy of all. Real justice isn't just proving others wrong, it's building something better so no one else has to fight just to be seen. Talent doesn't need a title, and brilliance doesn't wear a uniform. Sometimes the ones the world overlooks are the ones who change it forever.